Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's really an exciting opportunity to talk about a space that we've been designing and working with as a kind of integral part of a very large project, which I'll give you a brief touch point into for the last 6 years, which is quite a significant period of time. But let me just share my screen, and we'll start with that. Actually, I'm going to do it the other way around. I'm going to do and share the whole just my application windows because I'm going to go into and show a video. So I want to be able to show both. So let me just go full screen from that. I'm assuming everyone can see my screen, which is excellent. I'm going to minimize all these wonderful little windows that get in the way of everything. So I've called this about mediating connection at scale through space design, and it is going to talk about a particular space we have here at the University of Sydney, but it's also going to talk about a wider pedagogical idea or a wider pedagogical sort of approach that we've taken here to trying to develop students' capabilities to learn through connection. So it's kind of it's a bit of an interactive piece, and as Corinne said, I want to try and link this to what's kind of happened with this over the last 6 or 8 months as the space has actually now been used as a teaching space, and a lot more data's come out of that. So, it's just gone back to that for some reason. That's a bit odd. There we go. There we go. That's better. Right. So I'll just acknowledge that I myself am on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here at the campus at the Camperdown Darlington campus of the University of Sydney, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. So talking about space is really important because, you know, as a university, we are in part defined by our campus. We're in part defined by the buildings that we inhabit. We are defined by the lands that we are on. We are defined by how people and our students engage in those spaces. I was just commenting before people came on that we're in the final week of our exams, and you can see how the very different behaviours students have in the campus buildings from the semester behaviours where they're wandering around to go to classrooms to where they're studying for their exams, where they're finding quiet spaces and areas where they can be by themselves, or areas where they can have a greater sense of concentration. And the building almost gets bent and shaped through different uses, even just within inside its same semester period and within inside the same group of people, students and teachers. But for a lot of sort of understanding of higher education, spaces are really the sort of skeletal structures of what we do. They do rust on practices, experiences, and boundaries. They are designed to operate in a particular way. Most classrooms have fronts and backs. Most classrooms are very much built on the idea that you have a broadcaster and you have an audience. And because those spaces are designed to be lasting and rigorous and sometimes actually quite permanent, they don't come across as particularly flexible. And they kind of almost create a set of behaviors that have to exist in that space. They represent a huge investment for most universities in assets, time, expertise, and tradition. You look at some of the spaces in universities and they are built in ways that have been built in almost identical fashion for the last 6 or 7 centuries. Lecture theatres being the sort of primary representation of that. But they are also, for many institutions, the thing that is on the recruitment billboard. You know, students sitting in a classroom, smiling at each other, collectively working around laptops. Here at the University of Sydney, most people will know the most famous part of the university. I'm just looking over it over the road now at the Quadrangle. You know, almost 170-odd-year-old building in sandstone in the Oxbridge tradition, and that is what a lot of people come here for. But inside those spaces and those kind of much more architectural or marketing or value propositions, there's a sense of sociality. People want to use spaces to make connections and be social. They want to live in these spaces. It does represent, for many students, 3 years of their lives are within these spaces. And they help build or alternately break down the sense of belonging. Because a campus like this one here at Sydney is spread across 3 different postcodes. It's huge. in comparison to the sort of more intimate, unique vertical campuses that, say, UTS or WSU have at Parramatta. What this means for the user of the space is they often experience this quite passively. The affordances of the spaces are imposed upon them. So they don't really actually have a lot of chance to have agency over space. They don't have a lot of opportunity to shape that space. They might be involved in a co-design process, and that's a very small number. But in reality, the space is structured and you use the space as the space is designed. The designer, therefore, exerts all the agency over how that space should be used. And those designers are architects, those designers are university infrastructure teams, campus operations, estates, whatever you want to call them. And they exert an enormous amount of influence over how a student and academics to the same degree use space. So in many ways, those teaching spaces are quite settled. There's not been a lot of change in the model. There's been a lot of architectural superficiality in terms of colors, in terms of furniture types, but the core structure of a square box has barely changed. And therefore, the behaviors and social structures within those spaces have also barely changed. So at Sydney, since 2018, we've been running a project called Connected Learning at Scale. And the idea of connected learning at scale was we as an institution grew, our business school grew rapidly from 2014. We had about 7,500 students to our absolute peak of students, which was in 2022, where we had 17,500. And our units and the things we taught and the ways in which we taught didn't really change as our numbers effectively doubled. We just kind of magnified and multiplied them. So in 2018, I was brought in by the then dean to look at how we actually adapt the way we taught so that scale didn't become something we coped with, but scale became something that we leveraged and engaged. So we needed to move away from coping with scale to a design model for scale. We wanted to design and deliver a system of change that gave students an opportunity to have many sizes fitting many contexts. We often use the phrase, we don't want 1,000 students singing the same song. We want 1,000 different students singing 1,000 different songs. We wanted to reimagine each aspect of the teaching, learning, and assessment to embed connected learning all the way through the program. So it's not just oh, you make a connection here and there. It's how it is become part of the entire 3 or 2 year experience, and make this change in a way that brought people together. We got given a bit of money, which was great. We started with 2019 with our largest units in our Master and Bachelor of Commerce. During the pandemic, we expanded this, and now over 95% of our students are engaged in units that have been redeveloped with a connected learning approach at the very core of it. So it's a very large project, but when we were doing it, what we were identifying that whilst during COVID, this wasn't a problem because we could adapt the learning management system with a little bit easier than you can adapt, say, a classroom. The rooms and the spaces we were operating in were not enabling the type of connection that we wanted. So think about a lecture theatre. It's really hard to get a group of students in a lecture theatre to work with each other whilst the lecturer is at the front, because it's a tiered lecture theatre often. Sometimes it's flat, but generally it's tiered. They have to kind of twist weirdly behind themselves to go and to interact with others. And you can get maybe 1 or 2 or 3 working together, but after that, it becomes harder. It becomes even harder when you then want them to present what they've just worked on back to the whole group, because the entire AV system is set to broadcast one person out and not bring people from the back into the room. And so then you end up with those very embarrassing, and we've got to trudge through rows of seats and try and bring someone down to the front of the room, and then it all is quite often too hard for a lot of academics, particularly where a lecture might be an hour, in reality 50 minutes, when you've got the changeovers, and it just becomes too hard. And we were finding that a lot of our connected learning approaches, which take the entire student journey from the lecture right through to assessment, were struggling in the spaces that we were designing. So we broke down when we were talking about connection, what did we actually mean? And sure, when you're talking about connection through assessment, that makes logical sense. Group work, doing things where you go out and ask other people and bring knowledge back in. The curricular spaces made absolute sense. You design the units so that connected learning was at the heart of it. Online spaces, as I said, much easier. Social media spaces, quite less challenging. But the physical spaces, how do physical spaces enable people to connect and not just have that connection, but actually learn through it, was a real challenge for us. And so we started putting our thought into redesigning space that actually was something that natively enabled connected learning. And to put that in being a researcher and professor of business education as I do, I put that into kind of sort of research questions, which were really what are the epistemological principles that have been made manifest through to the pedagogical design that will enable landing sites for connected learning and the development of connectedness within traditional higher education spaces. In other words, how can the architectural design of a future teaching space catalyze connection, creative significance for students, and what we've referred to as ontological settlement, but in effect, that they feel comfortable and engaged enough with not just the space, but with each other and with what they're learning and how they're learning to be able to have a more resonant and lasting educational experience that enables a better learning outcome for them. So we came up with this idea of what is called the Connect space. So the Connect space had a number of kind of capacities we wanted to enable in it. As I said, this has been a 6-year project. So I go back here to the 2019 research brief that we set out. And we wanted to enable some capacities. And so some of those capacities are the capacity to engage with the crowd, the group, and the knowledge. Because in a lecture theatre, you can engage with the knowledge, but you rarely engage with the crowd and the group. In a small classroom, you can engage with the group and the knowledge, but you can't engage with the crowd because that's the lecture. So how do you take that capability of going from a large teaching experience to a medium sized to a small to an individual teaching experience in the same space? How do you use the space to generate new ideas and to solve? This is something that's come out of some work I had done in my previous institution, which was around the idea of what we contextualized as what's called a social media makerspace. It's very easy to see makerspaces in architectural design, engineering. They use makerspaces a lot, and it can have 3D printers. It can have, collaborative whiteboards and the like. But what kind of space when you're doing social science, which isn't as driven by the sort of tactility and physicality that comes from more STEM-based teaching. But in social science, how do you still use space and technology to enable people to make solutions to problems and generate new ideas? The capacity to create safe spaces to succeed. We wanted people to actually go past the assessment as assessment of learning Rubicon and move much more towards learning through assessment and actually having assessment as an instrument of learning. We wanted to enable the capacity to have learning experiences that lasted. We call that resonant learning here at Sydney, but it's very much about that capability of having an experience in the space that you remember. That when you remember it, it helps trigger your memory of what you learned. The capacity to build and leverage social connections, very important in a connected learning approach. To have agency, to give you agency over the space. To be able to have enable and engage First Nations knowledge and stories, which is a critical part of the university and business school strategy, and to disrupt that audience performer dynamic and actually have a much more holistic, networked model of engagement. So let me take you through the design phase. We set a series of what we called imagine if scenarios, and these were kind of hypothetical ways in which we could test our design capability against, wouldn't it be great if we could? So wouldn't it be great if we could have students having agency within the spaces they learn, deciding how they were going to use the space, how they were going to engage with each other and the teaching team? Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't it be cool if the space supported students with a variety of different learning and accessibility needs to actively engage with their colleagues and friends? And that could be whether they're online, whether they're in the room, whether they're managing different types of reasonable adjustments for learning disability, whether it's just simply they like to engage with people in different ways. Imagine if we could that the space catalyzed and rewarded student connection, that there was such a benefit that came from having a connected experience rather than a fractured one. So we started with my highly technical architectural drawing, which you can see here. The architectural drawing was me thinking about how do I enable those kind of what if scenarios? How do I break down the front of the room dynamic? How do I break down the capability of students being able to go from a large group to a small group? How do I make that happen in a completely non-architectural way, but in a way that I could try and share this with actual architectural experts to try and help them articulate it in a way that didn't have the whole thing fall down or have the whole thing not work from a sort of cost perspective that, yeah, I've got this brilliant idea. It looks really cool, but it's going to end up costing you like half a billion dollars to build for one classroom. So we took this idea and then we just pitched more of these, wouldn't it be cool if you could do stuff against that idea? Like, wouldn't it be cool if you could have 4 tutorials all running at once in the same room, that you didn't have to have 4 separate rooms? Wouldn't it be cool if you could facilitate interactivity and engagement for, in this case, 160 to 200 students? I think we started with 400 as that figure, and do it at scale. Wouldn't it be cool if you didn't need separate rooms for lecturing, group work, and tutorials, and you can switch between those modes easily without having to switch rooms? We know now if you want to do that, you have to have a lecture theatre, and you can only do the lecture. And then once that lecture's finished, maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, sometimes on the same day, later, students go and do their tutorial. But wouldn't it be cool if you didn't have to do it that way? Wouldn't it be cool if you could just have it all happening at once so that learning had proximity? And concepts and ideas and knowledge could all be connected and have some sort and be engaged with each other in a proximal way. So I brought in a colleague and friend of mine from the UK, Wendy Samuels, who is a learning design consultant with a company called Think Forward. And she took that very nascent drawing and tried to represent it into what would be something that would be architectural. And her original idea, it's a circular space. You could have 4 zones. You have everyone in the center when it's a large group. And then when you do your small group and you break into tutorials, you move to the outside of the room. And you've got group work tables, and then people can move back to the center of the room if you want to do some more group work. It had some different furnishings that you might want to use in that space. And that was the original idea that we had up till 2019. COVID hit, of course, then we didn't really do much with it because we didn't teach in a face-to-face way really in the business school again until mid-2022. Come mid-2022, we got some money to redesign this space here. This is in a building called Peter Nichols Russell here. It's inside the engineering precinct of the business school of the university. It was 2 large flat floor, I don't know what you want to call, they call them learning studios. They were pretty terrible. They didn't work especially well. The AV was very broken down. They had things that didn't make, like the TV and the equipment that was run there to create sort of like individual learning spaces. Most of those didn't work. You can see on the tables there, they've got those wheeled tables that were really popular about 10 or 15 years ago, and they're terrible for students. They move around. There's no wiring for students to plug anything in. it's a bit weird. As you can see, the one I love is that screen up in the ceiling. If you sit on three sides of it, you can see the screen. If you sit on the fourth side, you can't see the screen. It's kind of weird. I don't know why they built it that way, but it just never worked. So we were given this space. Just gives you an idea what it looked like. Very tall ceiling. It's 9 meters at the highest point. It's about 300 square meters on the first room. There was a second room connected to it, which had a stud wall. Um, that second room did have four sides on its monitor for some reason. As you can see, it's just a bit nothing, really. The second room was about 192 square meters. The whole lot came to about 158 students between the two rooms. And you can see on the left-hand side of that image there, it's just a stud wall. Interestingly, of course, for some strange reason, there was about 15 centimeter difference in floor heights. No one knows why, but they built 15 centimeter difference in floor heights between the two rooms. Um, what we kind of gave them as an idea was we wanted to set a room that had a capacity that matched at a minimum the room that we were given, 160, but up to 200. We liked the idea, as we showed in those original drawings, of 4 zones. I'll talk a bit about the rest in a second. What I might do is show you the video of the space so you can actually see what I'm talking about here. That should have popped up there. Yep. And unmute that. In 2018, the business school launched Connected Learning at Scale. It is our signature flagship program to transform the student experience for those students studying at the business school. One of the things that was really important to us when we designed the Connected Learning at Scale project was to have a space that truly enabled the kinds of learning that we saw happening in the business school. A lot of the spaces at the business school were great for delivering very traditional forms of learning, from teaching at the front to engaging in group work. The Connected Learning at Scale approach changes the way in which students engage with their academics, with their colleagues, and with the theory that they are studying. The Connected Learning at Scale approach is very much driven by using connections for learning. So in 2018, we thought about what kind of space did we want to do that. We sat down with a large piece of paper and we drew it, working with our UK partners Think Forward, and then with the university infrastructure team and with our architects, Architectus. We came up with this space. It took us over a year of building. It took a number of prototyping and pilot spaces to test the kind of dynamics and interactive capabilities we wanted to put in this space. And then we pushed the boundaries of technology, of architectural design, and of furniture to come up with a space that delivered on the vision and mission, not just of Connected Learning at Scale, but of the business school's strategy to be innovative, transformative, and sustainable.
The P&R space is very different to other teaching spaces. It doesn't conform to any of the norms, rows, columns. It's very different. It is very unstructured, but because it is unstructured, it's flexible. And I think flexibility is a really important thing in terms of being able to teach and get kids to learn in different ways.
In semester 2, 2024, we opened the CONNECTspace with 9 units and thousands of students coming into this room for the first time to try and experiment with different ways of teaching, different ways of learning. Each of these units in the business school and in the Faculty of Engineering here at the University of Sydney took a very different approach to the way they taught. They transformed the student experience. They thought about the ways in which they will use the space to enable better learning. But the proof of the pudding is not in what I say. The proof of the pudding is what the students think about the space that we have created for them, for their learning.
In terms of like a larger classroom, it's definitely, I think it's a better environment because like usually when you have this many people, it's usually in a lecture hall, like a small lecture hall, and you sort of feel disconnected from everybody. because you're all sort of facing the same direction and you can't really talk to anyone as well. Whereas this one, you have like sort of the separated spaces, but you can still like sort of go between them and like turn around and just talk to new people. And I think it does make it a bit easier to learn because it's very open. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like this space. Like there are a lot of monitors that I can sit wherever I want, and then we can watch the monitor. And also, I love the sofa. So great.
The fact that there's no real front to the space. There's tables and chairs all over the place, and so different people are walking around, and your attention is directed to where they are because there's always something going on a different corner of the room. Yeah.
Imagine if you had a space that was truly organic, inspired by nature, built using First Nations knowledge and First Nations skills to enable the outside to come in, to engage with students and how they see and feel in the space, how they engage not just with the things that are being taught, but with the environment and the atmosphere that's around them. So that just gives you an idea, I hope, of the sort of look of the space and what we're talking about. So you would have seen by the sort of vista, it's about 160 up to 200 people. It can divide into 4 zones. So you have 160 people. There's no front and back. So there's no person standing at the front. There are 4 zones in there. Each zone can control, there's a teaching space at the back of the zone that can be used and control the whole room, but can also be used by the teacher to break it up into 4 separate zones of between up around 40 people. That's done through the use of acoustic curtaining. You can just see it behind that gentleman's head there. That acoustic curtaining moves over with the press of a button and divides the room into 4 different rooms without anyone having to sort of get up and move. It also ensures that the space is actually surprisingly reasonably quiet between the 4 rooms. You don't get a lot of bleed. You get a bit of movement, but that's okay. There are 12 different furniture types in the room, from very tall down to the couches that student said he loved so much, to normal seats around tables. The whole thing is fully controllable in terms of AV. The room has multiple different screens all over the place. Each screen can be controlled. Every screen can broadcast what the academic wants to broadcast, but can also broadcast back to the entire room what students are working on that screen. So they could be working on a piece of work that the academic goes, this is really cool. Why don't I show this to the rest of the class? And they can show it to the rest of the class. The rest of the AV in the place is generally fully controllable. There's ceiling microphones that are designed to allow students to talk in the room and have that be heard not just by the room, but by people on Zoom. The academic can also walk around the room without a microphone, and the ceiling microphone grid picks them up. It works well, but doesn't work as well as we would have liked. The lights are all fully controllable, so you can control the different moods. And in fact, when the room goes from being large to small, the whole lighting grid changes. The space is very interactive and connected. You can see on the left-hand side behind the word furniture types, there's a glass door. That is, there's 8 of those in the space. They're called quiet booths. Inside those booths, which are acoustic booths, there's a screen and a microphone and a camera so that online students can interact with the face-to-face students in the room. What we've actually found they're really useful for is for students who are neurodiverse, who need low sensation rooms. And they can actually be very good for students to still feel part of the class, still feel engaged, but actually be in a much more sensorily controlled space. The whole space is organic and natural, as the video mentioned. We wanted to bring the organic and natural atmosphere into the room. There's a lot of timbers, the colors are natural. The windows draw in the space outside and there, and all the labeling and wayfinding in the space is very driven by nature. So the tables all have tree and nature's names attached to them. Right. Just to give you an idea about what the floor space looks like, that's it from the top, from the architectural drawing. We eventually abandoned the idea of having 2 separate spaces that they moved out and in from. And the idea is that this space did everything. So when you're in a large group of 160, you can be in the space, but when you're in your small groups, you stay in those same spaces. And as you'll notice, whilst there is a kind of almost a front of the room in the boomerang section there, just above the red cloud, it's not really a front of the space. And in each of these rooms, there's a teaching space that can control the AV, has got the sort of document camera and a few other things they're fairly fixed, but are generally not where you would as the teacher teach from. You move around the space, you're mobile in the space. So for us, it was about 4 things. It was about changing the dynamics, it was about changing the relationships, changing the functions, and changing the design. This is really important because design and architecture is one thing, and architecturally, this is a beautiful room. The furniture, not stupidly expensive. The AV, a lot of it's standard, but some of it's pretty high end. The quiet booths are a cool idea. They're really common in most meeting rooms, in a lot of meeting spaces these days. Co-working spaces use them all the time. When you're in flexible working spaces, they're quite common as well for people to have Zoom meetings. These are not like incredibly outrageous architectural things, but when put into a space with the idea that we're looking at the dynamics that happen in the room, the relationships that happen, the functions and the design of the room, they actually start to enable what I talked about at the start, that capability of giving students agency, staff agency in the space. So through changing the relationships in the space, what we were trying to enable was fleeting and lasting human connections. We were really keen that a student wasn't entirely focused on only having eye lines, for example, to the academic. There's an element of communicative power that comes from that, but there's also a lot of power that comes from having multiple eye lines. A project I worked on a number of years ago had a lecture theatre that was effectively what in theory was based on Parliament, where you sort of have 2 sides of a bowl that come and face the middle. And we designed a lecture theatre that had that. And that was fantastic because it was in a economics and political science school that was quite relevant. What we found completely coincidentally was that, yes, students could look down into the centre of the bowl, like where the Prime Minister and the opposition leader are, and can see what's going on almost in a kind of gladiatorial arena kind of way. But where was their eye line generally taken? Right in front of them, straight at other students across the way. And by immediately changing those eye lines, you started to build connections. People would see each other. And then when they'd see each other and they're acute, they'd go, I recognize you, I saw you in the lecture. And there's a familiarity that starts to breed. So the whole room, when you see this, eye lines are all over the place. You've got eye lines to the teacher, you've got eye lines to other teachers, you've got eye lines to the other room, you've got eye lines out to the windows at the back and on the left-hand side there with the sort of serrated edge. But your eye line is not singular. And that starts to build the conditions for connection. Then you're sitting around at a table and having proximity to people, that changes again. And then some of these areas where there are couches or bench couches, you've got a closer proximity, but you don't have to sit in those. If you don't feel comfortable in that, you can go and sit in a seat. You can sit at a taller seat. You can sit at a more traditional table. But if you feel comfortable in those environments and actually like that kind of, and I use intimacy in a more positivist way here, but if you like that intimacy of like the little booth and the couches, then you've got agency to sit in that kind of environment. You can even sit away from people, as I said, and if the environment is confronting to you, you've got quiet booths. You can go and sit in those. Through changing the functions of the space, we were enabling interactivity at scale. So this is where we wanted students to interact with each other and the materials that were developed, and they could share their outputs between groups and with academics, not just happening at the tables. The monitors can be fed back to the entire room or to one of the 4 zones. The microphones in the ceiling, which you can just see there, allow people to stand up, communicate. It can get shared with everyone in the room so that you don't have to have that problem in a lecture theatre of trying to get people to come to the front. There's also roving mics in the room that can be used to enable that even more quickly. Through changing the dynamics of the space, we wanted to enable the capability of what was, and because we've got to remember when this was being designed, natively hybrid teaching. We're still really keen on that. We're still really keen on the idea that, particularly with the complications of people's work life and play, that if they can't make a class because they're working, they can still zoom into that class. They can still interact with their classmates. They can still participate in the tutorial work, which they can't do at the moment in an online way, unless they're in a completely online class. But they can do all of that in these booths. And they do work, but that takes real design from the teacher. That takes a pedagogical redesign, which is why connected learning at scale is a really important component of this room working, because you need the curricular redesign, the assessment redesign, the teaching and learning redesign as well. But as I said, we found completely, not by accident, but by thinking about it. In fact, we were talking to our disability services when we were showing to them. They said, oh, this is going to be great because these are low sensory rooms, but you can also make them high sensory rooms. So, you can have more things going on if you want, if high sensory is what your neurodiversity is requiring. Through changing the design, so then we did get into some of the design elements, we enabled interactivity between not just the students themselves, but with the teaching team. Because if that room is operated in the way in which a lot of people are using it, they might do half an hour at 160 people, break it into their tutorials, and the whole teaching team's there. I've got a really good example of one of the academics this semester who's used it in a way that has the 4 rooms as you didn't understand what we did last week, you really struggled with it, you kind of get what you did last week in the second room, you're pretty confident in the third room, last week was the easiest thing you've ever done in your life and you want to progress forward. And he would, after doing that kind of first half an hour lecture, if you will, a little bit of a diagnostic or a quiz, and students ended up being in those 4 rooms. And they could get the idea pretty quickly and then move into the next room. And it just created a staging through the 4 rooms, a really lovely use of 4 different zones that you couldn't do if you'd booked 4 different tutorials all around the university. Other people are literally just using it to deliver. The largest we've got in there is 8 different tutorials. So 2 different tutorials in each zone, back and forward. And that means that you've got 9 teachers in the room. And those teachers talk to each other, those teachers interact with each other, particularly in the 4 zones where you have 2 tutorials, the 2 teachers are seeing each other teach, and they can actually have a bit of a swap over if they want to do a slightly bigger group activity between the 40 students instead of the 20. It just gives the design gives such capability for flexibility and just so many different opportunities and possibilities that really does help you deal with things like learning gain and threshold concepts. It's a really powerful model of how the design enables something different. And by changing the design of the space, we also wanted to give people different landing spaces. And that means that they can choose where they want to sit, they can choose what they feel comfortable with, but also we really wanted to give an engagement with agency. It's your space, you deal with it, you choose the way you want to use it. We wanted to engage really carefully with nature. There's it is, I think, one of the only classrooms we have in the university that has plants in the classroom. You'll see an edge of that. But we wanted natural colors, natural timbers. We have First Nations knowledge embedded in the room in a number of different ways. One is art. The obvious one is art. You can see that there. But a major architectural intervention in the room, because we had a 9-meter ceiling, we had to lower the ceiling height, but without putting in a fake ceiling. A First Nations company in Brisbane designed an amazing wood, effectively a boomerang shape in the ceiling that had a number of purposes. One, it hid literally miles and miles and miles of cable. It acts as an acoustic treatment, lowering the ceiling height, but without lowering the space that you get from having a high ceiling. And it creates a really lovely acoustic feeling in the room. It's all natural timbers, it's all beautifully done. But the actual architectural feature that creates the acoustic treatment is dots in the wood, or holes in the wood. Those holes in the wood are assembled in a way that is a piece of Indigenous art. And the artist has described how that works, because it is she wanted that piece to sort of represent the importance of sound and transference of sound to her own Indigenous cultures. And that story is told to every student as they walk in the room. That is on the wall as they walk in the room, and they can see but the artwork in the ceiling. It's not just a piece in the room, it is part of the room. So overall, this is what we put in there this semester. So this is our second semester of running it. 4,500 students in there this semester, 4,130 unique students. So 500 of them got to do it twice. 11 coordinators in 11 different units, 56 academics in the room at various times over the course of the semester, and 2 different faculties, engineering and business. As you can see, it is deeply used from 8 in the morning until at least 7:30 at night, 5 nights a week. And it is used quite extensively on Saturdays as well. So it's a highly leveraged room. So what's come out of this in the last couple of semesters of evaluation? I just picked 2 quotes. I found these interesting. Yes, it helped for my group project, but it's not only about my group projects. So I am like, as an international student, I definitely want to have a community or meet with other people who are from different cultures. So I didn't feel that bond in the room from the different cultures. What they actually felt was it helped with the group projects. So that was much more focused for that student on the project, little less on the kind of informal connections in the room, which was interesting. The alternate one, which I found interesting, was that they felt it built a much stronger connection between them, the tutor, the tutorial, and what happened in the learning activities. And that was in an engineering course. One really interesting output in both semesters that I didn't talk about when I presented this at ASCILITE was that what the students told us was, we don't want to leave the room. So why can't we, when we finish our 1 hour class or our 2 hour class, you can see those blocks are quite tight. Some of them are in 1 hour, most are in 2 hours. There's a couple of 3 hours, I think. Most of them said, let's say in INFS 5002 on a Wednesday, I really wouldn't have mind staying in the room. Maybe work with my group for a little bit. Just me and my group, no teachers, we don't need to be in there. But they had to be kicked out because Think 3600 was coming in. So students love being in the space. They think that the space offers an opportunity to be a hybrid between what they know a space to do and what they would like to do with a space. So that learning, teaching space hybrid thing. So this is just some of the people that are involved. We had a lot of people involved in the project. It's been running for a long time. The room opened in June 2024. We're into our 3rd semester about to start. But I might leave my presentation there and I'll stop sharing my screen. And thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. It's very insightful. I certainly have written down a few things and I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought of that. I just want to highlight a few things that really resonated with me. I love that it sounds like the space was really meaningfully planned. I love the fact that spaces for neurodiverse people were included, as well as I love that part about the Indigenous art and how it's structural design, but also you've embedded that story of why it's there throughout. So it's beautifully planned. And I also think the fact that those spaces reflect what your students are likely going to experience in the workforce. Like, as you said, quiet rooms, flexible meeting spaces, that is where the direction of workplaces are going. Before I ramble on a little bit longer, I do have some questions, but I also want to put it out to our audience and see if anyone else has a few questions.
No, but thank you. It was very insightful.
Thank you, Bronwyn.
I'm really interested, Peter, the overarching idea. I've been similar in a similar job redesigning learning spaces in a primary school setting. And it's all well and good to have these spaces designed like this, but if the pedagogy, if the teaching doesn't match the environment, then these features are not utilized to their best ability, and you end up reverting back to what we know and what we're comfortable with. So it was good that you recognized that, but I'm sure that's actually quite a big part of the process, is changing teaching engagement strategies and styles from what we know to be what is traditionally how we interact, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's, I mean, we were very purposeful in who used the room. People had to bid to put in the room, to go into the room. They had to be willing to say how they were going to use the room's capabilities. I did a much less ambitious, but for the institution I was working at, highly ambitious change to a room that just moved from rows of tables to what are called plectrum tables. So the sort of like teardrop shaped tables. And what we'd find is we'd go in, the porters would go in there on a morning, and all someone had done is just rearrange those teardrop tables in a line so people could sit behind them. So this room, we didn't say that was something you couldn't do. The furniture is flexible, but you just wouldn't, there's just no benefit to doing it because you've chosen to be in that room and do something different. And what we said all along is, yeah, I got some cool ideas, but if you've got a better idea on how that space is used, give it a go. And at this stage, no one who used the space in semester 2, 2024 has asked to move out of the space now as we're heading into semester 2, 2025. Everybody wants to reuse the space again. So whilst it had its settling in problems, and there always are settling in problems in a new space, they've got used to those. They now know how to use it. And because the AV is actually really simple, controlled through a panel, and it's pretty much one button. I want to go from 160 to 40, you just press a button. What you can then do, if you know what you're doing, is you just go one level below that, and then you can start saying, but I actually really what I want is this zone to be lit like this, and this zone to be lit like that, and I want this, and you can create your effectively own customized version of everything in the room, and you save that. So once you've spent maybe an hour sitting there programming that customized version in the non-teaching weeks, you just can go in every week and say, this is Peter's version, bang, and up comes my panel. And that just makes that fear that it's not going to work, or I'm fiddling around with a button trying to make something work and I look foolish in front of the student, evaporate, because you know exactly what you've programmed. And a lot of people are starting to do that, and that's what you get now. Well, I've done all that work. Now I just come in, I've got my buttons, and some people have actually got, this is Peter week 1, week 2, and I've got a different setup for each of the weeks that I want to do in the different weeks.
So is there, and sort of to Bronwyn's question, is there any training involved for staff and or students? And did you notice an adjustment period, or people that are putting up their hand already sort of in that space and I guess beyond the traditional walls that we normally envision?
Yeah, we definitely had to do a fairly intense period of a sort of introduction and transition into the space. We had about 5 weeks where the space wasn't used, but it was open. They were still doing sort of hitch cleaning and fixing and stuff. So you did a lot of training with staff. We now do a much lighter training for new staff. We give an sort of introduction to the space, an orientation to the space for students, because we show them where, if they want to go get whiteboard markers or post-it notes, where they can go get them, how the space works, what the quiet booths are for, if you want to use the quiet booths, all of that stuff. There was a real adjustment period at the start where people were complaining the technology didn't work. But once they worked out that it wasn't the technology didn't work, it just didn't replicate what they were used to. And once they said, but I don't need to do that now, I need to do this, the technology generally works. Without a doubt, there are still some hitches in the room. It's a pilot space. The curtaining is a bit of a ghost curtain, and sometimes it will just close by itself without anyone pressing a button, which can be a bit freaky when you're in the middle of presenting. But aside from that, most of the interventions we did in the room worked. It just takes, as always with these things, practice.
Certainly. I feel like the ghost curtain thing might be add to dramatic effects. And I have one more question. In terms, I'm not sure if this was an issue, but obviously a lot of universities are noticing student attendance can sort of waver. Has there been an uptake in student attendance in this pilot space, or it wasn't an issue, or it's not something that you've necessarily been tracking?
We haven't really been tracking that one in this one. I think student attendance decline is pretty universal. We know it's worse in lectures than it is in tutorials, although they're still tracking, they're still decline across the semester. The starting point is higher and the starting point is lower. But we didn't notice any real change, but I don't think we went into it in great detail. It's kind of looking a little bit too much behind the looking glass that we didn't really want to go into.
Fair enough. Thank you. Just before we wrap up, are there any other questions from our audience? I know Bronwyn and a few other people have just popped out. If anyone is interested, can they get in touch with you via LinkedIn or?
Yep, no
Perfect.
problem at all. Just write to me at Sydney or via LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I found it really interesting, really engaging. If there are no other questions, hopefully everyone has a great day and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody,
Thank you.
for coming.
Thank you, Peter. Really appreciate it today.
No, my pleasure. I'm glad people enjoyed it.
It was fantastic.
Cool. Excellent.
I'm just going to stop the recording.